You know, that feeling, that desire for complete safety, being totally protected. Well, that idea really jumped out recently with this new U.S. missile defense plan they unveiled, the Golden Dome. And it wasn't some footnote somewhere Donald Trump announced it himself, right alongside his defense secretary.
Right. And what we want to do here, I think, is get past the headlines. Let's try to understand the actual nuts and bolts of this Golden Dome plan. We'll stick just to what they've actually announced, the public details, no guesswork, just looking at what's been shared.
Exactly. So whether you follow defense tech or you're trying to figure out geopolitics, or maybe you're just interested in these massive government projects, well, this Golden Dome plan is pretty significant. We're going to break down what they're proposing, the tech involved, the timeline they're suggesting, the cost, and importantly, what seems to be driving it. We'll even compare it a bit to systems you might know, like Israel's Iron Dome. Okay, let's get into it.
Yeah, the announcement itself was a big deal. It follows up on a promise Trump made during his campaign, this idea of a super advanced missile shield for the U.S. A key thing was that they've officially picked an architecture for the system. State-of-the-art, they called it. And by architecture, we just mean the overall design, how all the pieces are supposed to fit and work together.
And it sounds like they're thinking really big picture here. They talked about using next-gen tech across land, sea, and space. That's a huge scope. They specifically mentioned sensors in space, even interceptors based in space. Oh, and here's something interesting. They mentioned Canada might be interested in joining in or getting similar protection.
That definitely adds a layer, doesn't it? Potential international cooperation. But let's stick to the U.S. system for now. The timeline they gave was also, well, quite ambitious. The goal, they stated, was to have it fully working before the end of Trump's term, which, given the announcement was May 2025, means, what, about 3 years?
3 years, yeah.
That seems incredibly fast for something this complex.
Absolutely. And the capabilities they're aiming for are just as ambitious. They claim it'll be able to stop missiles launched from anywhere on Earth. And, get this, even missiles coming from space. And, characteristically, Trump said it'll be the best system ever built. That's quite a statement.
It is, which naturally leads us to the technology, what's actually powering this thing. When you hear missile defense, you probably think of existing systems. The announcement directly compared it to Israel's Iron Dome. And Iron Dome, as you know, has gotten a lot of attention for stopping those short-range rockets aimed at Israeli towns. It uses ground radar, detects them, and fires interceptors.
Right, and it's seen as pretty successful for that specific job in that specific place. The announcement also mentioned current U.S. systems like the Patriot. Those are surface-to-air, usually based at military sites. Oklahoma and Alaska were mentioned as examples. So how is this Golden Dome supposed to be different, technologically speaking, from those?
Well, the main difference seems to be this heavy focus on using space. The Golden Dome would probably use infrared sensors based in space to spot and track missile launches right away. Think of like heat-detecting cameras way up there, spotting the heat from a launch very, very early. That's a big shift from just relying on ground-based radar.
Okay, so space-based sensors. What's the big advantage there? Why go through all the trouble and expense of putting this stuff in space?
The main advantage is getting much earlier detection, significantly earlier. Sensors in space could potentially see a missile during its boost phase. That's right after launch when the engines are burning hot. Ground radar usually has to wait until the missile is much higher up, so this early warning gives you a lot more time to react to try and intercept it. And what's interesting is that earlier detection might allow for different ways to intercept that you just couldn't do if you spotted it later.
Right, so it's about getting that critical head start, seeing it and tracking it much earlier. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, now let's talk about the why. Why now? What are the motivations, the sort of strategic context for the Golden Dome? We know they specifically mentioned being inspired by Israel's Iron Dome.
That seems to be a key starting point, yes.
Mm-hmm.
The success of Iron Dome in protecting Israeli civilians clearly made an impression. But, and the announcement said this too, the scale is just vastly different. Israel is, what about the size of New Jersey? Facing mostly shorter range rockets, the U.S. mainland is obviously enormous, and the potential threats could be much more advanced missiles coming from much farther away.
Right.
So thinking bigger picture, that difference in scale alone pretty much demands a different kind of defense system. That's probably why they're looking at space. You can't just, build 1,000 Iron Domes across the U.S. It wouldn't work the same way.
Yeah, it's not just needing more defense, it's needing a fundamentally different type of defense because the problem is different.
Okay. Now, what about the money? Trump mentioned a cost estimate of $25 billion. That's a lot of money, obviously. but the announcement also contrasted it with some previous estimates that were like $500 billion, $500 billion. That's a massive difference.
It really is a huge difference. That $25 billion number certainly makes the project sound more achievable, politically speaking, but it does make you wonder about the actual scope. Can they really develop and deploy something this complex with this advanced tech on that budget, especially considering the tight timeline we talked about?
Good point. And it seems like not everyone in the defense world was immediately on board. Journalists reported some skepticism about whether it was actually necessary. Some noted that NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, hadn't really been pushing for this. Yeah, that suggests there might be a bit of a gap between the political push for this and maybe the military assessment of current threats and priorities. The question of where the idea came from is interesting, too. Trump said it was his idea, and then he went to the generals and got them to agree. So it sounds like a top-down directive.
Which, when you combine that with appointing a program manager right away, it really shows they want to move fast. That program manager has quite a job ahead, though, with that budget and that 3-year deadline.
Absolutely. Okay, so for you listening, what are the key things to take away from this initial announcement? First, the U.S. is launching this really ambitious project, a big, comprehensive missile defense system, with a major part of it based in space.
Second, while it definitely took inspiration from Israel's Iron Dome, this Golden Dome is meant for a totally different challenge. Protecting a much, much larger country with global interests, the scale and the potential threats are just fundamentally different.
Third, using space technology for early detection, that's a big potential leap forward. It could give a crucial time advantage against incoming threats.
Fourth, that timeline. Getting it fully operational in just 3 years? That sounds incredibly ambitious, maybe even challenging. There could be significant hurdles.
And finally, it seems pretty clear this whole initiative is really being driven by the former president's vision.
So wrapping up our discussion here, we've looked at the initial Golden Dome announcement, the tech they're talking about, that quick timeline, the huge scale, and where the idea seems to have come from. It really looks like a potential major shift in U.S. missile defense strategy, and that could have ripples around the world.
Definitely.
And maybe that leaves us with a final thought for you to consider. With missile technology advancing so rapidly everywhere and international relations being so complex, what might be the long-term effects, the intended ones and maybe the unintended ones, of putting a missile defense system like the Golden Dome up in space? It's definitely something we'll need to keep an eye on.